but it's important to make racists uncomfortable. Hello readers, it's Sasha, and today I am going to be doing, why am I going like this? So today I'm going to be reviewing one of my most anticipated books of the year, and that is The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigardar. I'm very excited to be reviewing this book. I will just start off this entire video by saying my experience reading this book will not be accurate to the book as a whole, because this book follows a lesbian Muslim girl, and I am neither of those things. So my experience reading this isn't going to be truly authentic to the experience of somebody who is a lesbian Muslim girl reading this book. But I am very, very excited to actually be getting to reviewing this book. I finished this book probably about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now, and I'm excited for it to finally be going up. Also, please comment down below how smashing my camera quality is, because I just got a new iPhone, because yeah, I film on my iPhone and that's probably never going to change, and she's actually slapping. I feel so much cuter than I did before, and the angles are wider, and we're having such a good time overall. It doesn't make me look as greasy. So let's go. So first off, the genre. The genre is contemporary. We love a good contemporary. Lately, that's been my thing. Contemporary and I have been so close. So was super excited about that. This book basically follows Nishat, who is a lesbian Muslim girl who came out to her family, and her family pretty much said that we want you to be whatever you want to be, but not that. Don't be that. That's gonna bring shame to our family. And so she's kind of trying to figure out what she wants to do in terms of, does she want to hide who she is? Does she want to just be who she is and accept the consequences of her family? And then she ends up reconnecting with a childhood friend named Flavia, and she starts realizing, oh shit, Flavia is cute, and she's kind of exactly what I'm looking for in a girl. So she kind of falls a little bit hard for Flavia, and then finds out that Flavia is actually going to be going to the exact same school that she's going to. So she's a little excited and nervous at the same time, because this is very different for her. And she ends up reconnecting with Flavia, and Flavia ends up in a business class with her. And in this business class, basically they have announced that there's going to be an entrepreneurship contest where each person, or teams of 2 or 3 in the class, can kind of create their own business. And then at the end of the semester, I believe it was, then the winner, the one who gained the most business, would get 1,000 euros from their sponsors. So obviously Nishat wants that more than anything, so she decides to do a henna business. What she wasn't anticipating was Flavia also doing a henna business. And then this book pretty much just follows them kind of competing with each other, and Nishat still having feelings for Flavia. So that is what this book is about, and the premise just to me sounded so good, so that's why I knew I had to read it. I'm very glad I did. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. I loved a good chunk of what I read. I had a very good time reading this book, but there were some things that I just did not like, which I will touch on later. The average rating on Goodreads was 4.10 out of 1,170 ratings and 400 reviews at the time of me actually filming this. So this book hit a lot of people, a lot more than the last book that I reviewed within a month. So that's pretty exciting. Talking about representation, Nishat was Muslim. She was from Bangladesh. She was lesbian. Flavia, her love interest, was bisexual. She was half Brazilian, half Irish. And those are really the only characters that we truly get to know. I mean, Nishat does have another friend named Chaewon, and she is from Korea. So there's definitely a lot of representation, and it was all very positive. In terms of content warnings, something I adored about this book is that literally it had content warnings. That is so good. Imagine if every book put content warnings at the beginning. That would be so amazing. So basically, if you didn't catch all that, there are content warnings for homophobia. Obviously, given the story situation, you can kind of guess what that is about. Bullying and racism, which do kind of go together, because people do bully Nishat because she is a different race than the people that go to her predominantly white Catholic school. And there is also an outing of a character within the story. So if any of those things can harm you in any way, don't read this story. But if not, or if it's something that you personally think you could read, I do suggest reading this book. We're gonna jump straight into plot. So basically the entire plot just follows Nishat and Flavia trying to figure out their feelings for each other and also competing in this henna competition that could literally get them 1,000 euros. So obviously things get a little heated, tensions rise a little bit. Overall, the plot is pretty straightforward. I think we can kind of all figure it out as it goes along, which I'm very, very thankful for. Every single major plot point within the story actually made sense to the whole scheme of the story. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. I hate when there are different things that have absolutely nothing to do with the end goal or anything, and it just bothers me so much, but everything fit in and everything connected really well, and I loved that about this story. In terms of pacing, it was kind of the exact amount of fast versus slow that a person would like to have in a book. There were a lot of moments where it was just kind of going, and in contemporary that can be a very hard thing to do, but some of the scenes with Nishat's family and some of the scenes with Flavia were so intense that it was so fast paced, whereas there were certain scenes where Nishat was just by herself and thinking and contemplating, and those scenes were a little bit slower and you kind of had to think a little bit harder about what was going on, and it was just a very good blend of everything that a person would want reading a story like this, so I'm very happy with the pacing. Moving into characters, so there weren't actually any good characters in this book. Everybody within this story was very morally gray. Like, everybody in this story had very, very evident flaws. And in some cases that can work really well in a story, but I wasn't the biggest fan of it in this sense. So our main character, Nishat, she came off as a very passive character. She came off as a very "my problems are bigger than yours" character. She came off as a very negative and very, at times, just very rude. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. She was just rude to the people around her who genuinely cared about her. And when I'm saying that, I mean her sister, because other people around her kind of did her dirty at certain points, but her sister Preeti, who is obviously not without flaws because that is like a theme going on in the story, but she was very, very much the best character in this story. She was always trying to be there for Nishat. She didn't know how to be because obviously she was raised the same way, so she was still trying to grapple with her sister being a lesbian and trying to understand what that meant for the family, and she still had her own feelings and her own worries, but she was always there for Nishat. She was always consistently, after every negative thing that happened, she was there and she was ready to fight for Nishat. And Nishat would just throw her to the curb when she got tired of her. And that bothered me. That pissed me off. It wasn't that Nishat was inherently a bad person. It's just that the way that her character was written was so, it bothered me. It just bothered me so much because she, like, obviously she was going through shit. Like, she had huge problems she was facing. But I did actually really love how she stayed true to herself. She stayed true to her Bengali roots, but also stayed true to her sexuality throughout this whole story. There were so many different moments where Nishat could have just been like, okay, yeah, you're right, mom. I'm not a lesbian. It was a phase. But she was like, no, this is who I am, and I'm going to be accepted for that. If this story gets put in the correct hands, like for people who really need this story, this could be very life-changing for them, and I think that's really important. Also, I don't think I've ever related to a character more than I related to Nishat in one specific aspect, because I believe there was at least like 2 or 3 pages where she was just talking about food and how excited she was for food at a wedding, and that was the only good part of a wedding, and how she was like, I'm gonna fill up with like 4 plates of food, and I was like, same girl. Like, I've never related to anything more in my entire life. I was reading and I was like, that's me at a Saturday morning buffet. Like, I was like, yes, good. Like, that was very early on in the story, and I was like, okay, yeah, Nishat and I were pretty close. Obviously, kind of didn't love her as much toward the end of the story. Well, actually, not toward the end. In the middle of the story, I didn't love her as much, but I really did love that part of her where she was like obsessed with food. In terms of authenticity, so was the plot, was the book the same as it is advertised? Yes and no. Yes, everything in the synopsis is pretty much exactly what happens. However, this is advertised on several different platforms as being an enemies to lovers romance, and it's just not that, because there is absolutely not a single part of this novel where either of them hate each other. Actually, you know what? Nishat might hate Flavia a little bit at certain points, but there is never a specific point where Flavia ever hates Nishat. And so, in order for it to be an enemies to lovers, both need to hate each other and loathe each other and then come together in this slow burn type way where you're just like, That didn't happen here. At most, this was a friends to lovers, which is equally satisfying in a very different way. Let's talk about the world. So in this case, it was a setting. Obviously, Adiba Jaigardar did not create Ireland. So let's talk about the setting. This book was set mostly in a Catholic school in Ireland. I can't relate to the Ireland part and I can't relate to the Catholic part, but I grew up in a Christian private school. So in a lot of ways, I could relate to Nishat in the sense of not being able to really be yourself in an environment that stifles who you are. I wouldn't change me going to Christian school because like the stories are banging. Like some stories I can bring up at parties and people will just be like, well, that makes me uncomfortable. And I'm just like, yeah, you're welcome. So that, but also I had some amazing friends there. I had some amazing times, but I will say that I struggled with understanding who I was for a good 8 or 9 years because of things that the Christian school would tell me I couldn't be. Like, you couldn't be attracted to people of the same sex because you would go to hell, and that was wrong. And people who were Christians would never be attracted to people of the same sex. And I knew that I was attracted to boys, so I was like, okay, cool, we're safe. But then I also was attracted to girls, and I was like, uh-oh, gotta stifle that. So I did hide that from even myself for a very long period of time. And I'm like just now kind of coming to terms with that. So in terms of Nishat, I understand what she was going through in terms of struggling to be herself, in terms of her sexuality. I will never understand the bullying for being a different race that she had because I can't. But with Nishat, I can at least relate to her in a sense of that very specific setting. So I enjoyed where it was set. I think a Christian school or Catholic school setting is an interesting place to explore concepts that are typically taboo in religion, and I liked that Adiba Jaigardar did that here. So that was a win for me. In terms of writing style, I actually really enjoyed the writing style. A lot of people found it to be very immature, very straight to the point, but I'm not the type of person who likes descriptive, flowery writing as much. I always prefer a little bit of a straight to the point, more dialogue heavy writing as is, and this is exactly what that was. So I have no complaints about the writing style, but if you're going into this, don't expect it to be like very flowery, filled with metaphors. It's just not. Like there were some very, very important quotes within the story. There were some very important messages, but they're not done in a very like flowery way. It's done in a very like, here's the message, take it or leave it kind of way. And I prefer that over flowery, so I enjoyed that more than some people would. Did it end up going where I wanted it to? Yes. Oh my gosh. There was a part of this story where I was like, if this author decides to take this in a completely different way, I'm going to be bitter. But she didn't, and it ended up going where I wanted it to go. It was the ending that I think all of the characters needed, but I also needed myself as the reader, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Closing thoughts. I really enjoyed the blending of cultures within this story. I learned a lot about Bengali culture. I find in YA, it's very hard to learn about cultures because fantasy, obviously, it's like a whole new culture. Things are made up. It's a whole other realm. But a lot of the contemporary I've been reading that has been on my radar, it had been mostly like European or American, and you don't really get to learn a lot about other parts of the world and other cultures. But I learned so much about Bengali culture, and it really makes me want to seek out more stories with diverse characters because I really enjoyed learning about the cultural expectations, the food, the way that people get married. Like I learned all about the Bengali weddings at the beginning, and I just thought it was really interesting. And I also enjoyed the conversation that this book allowed in terms of discussing cultural appropriation, because a lot of people, myself included, never really understood it, didn't really grasp it. And even while reading, I struggled to understand the issue because I didn't get it because it's not something I had ever really had to think about. But toward the end, where I get a little bit more into Nishat and Flavia's narratives, and I started thinking a little bit more, I started to understand some of the issues that Nishat had, and it questioned my own beliefs and my own thoughts on what I thought was right and what I thought was okay to do. I find for other white readers who actually read this book, I think it would be really important because a lot of us don't actually think about cultural appropriation really at all. Like, it's not something that people have to think about unless it's something that happens to them. So for us being white, there are certain things where we actually have to understand the implications of doing it, and we have to respect the culture that it comes from. So I think this was a very important message and important part of the book that, although I didn't quite understand when I first started reading it, I feel like I came out of the story with a better knowledge of it, and I'm very thankful for that. I also really enjoyed the calling out of religious hypocrisy, because this book pretty much says, why is it okay for people to pick and choose what they practice out of religious texts? Why is it okay for one person to do something, but it's not okay for another person to be gay, when both of those things are negatives within religious texts in general? And I liked that because it's a question I've asked myself a lot growing up. Why is it okay for one person to do this and one person not to do this, when they're both explicitly told by whatever we believe in to not do either of them? Like, what is it? And this book pretty much it does imply that people pick and choose what they want from their religious texts to fit their own agendas. And I thought that was very accurate, and I thought that was very real, and that's something that I have 100% questioned in my life, so I loved that aspect of it. I didn't love pop culture references. There were a lot of pop culture references that I don't think will age this book in a very graceful way. It's like when you're listening to songs like Cool by the Jonas Brothers, where they mention like Post Malone and Game of Thrones. That's not a song that's gonna age very well, because in 20 years, like, none of the kids are gonna know what that is, who those were. And this is kind of in the same thing. Pop culture references can cause a disconnect within the story itself. I don't know why I'm holding this. And last thing, I didn't love that not a single character faced any sort of consequence for anything they did wrong. Like, there were a lot of times where Nishat was a jerk to Preeti and just was not a good sister, wasn't a good friend, XYZ. She never gets challenged on that. And all she ever says is, oh, I'm sorry. And Preeti's like, it's okay, I forgive you. And it's like, no, you need to have a little bit more self-respect and just honestly just explain why she pissed you off and explain why you were hurt and hold her to other standards now. And that didn't happen. And also, like, the characters who bullied, the characters who were racist, the character who outed another character, nothing happened. Like, absolutely not a single consequence happened. And it's just like, to me, that shows a lack of character growth, because if you're not improving in your story, you're not challenging the negatives that have happened, then what's the point of a story? What's the point of a story if there's absolutely no character growth? And I guess Nishat does grow a little bit. I'm not saying she doesn't, but as a whole, the majority of characters within the story just didn't grow. They stayed very flat, because, I mean, one girl, she apologized for doing something, but like, she didn't actually apologize, and then they were like she tried, and it's like, no, she didn't because she was uncomfortable. But it's important to make racists uncomfortable and bullies uncomfortable. Like, it's important to do those things, to hold them accountable for things that they've done to you. And so it kind of bothered me that not a single person was challenged within this story, especially because I felt like the narrative was going in that direction. Okay, that's it. That is literally it. So let me know in the comments below if you've read this book, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, what your thoughts were on this story. And I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope it kind of made a little bit of sense. I hope you guys give this book a chance, because it's very well done and it is a good story, and I think more people should know about it. And until next time, bye readers!